My first week of playing the new DLC, The Dwarves of Runenberg, for the last spell has officially ended, and so it's time for me to collect some of my thoughts and talk about the good, the bad, and the ugly of this DLC. What do I like, what do I love, and what could use a little bit of work? So without any further ado, let's start chatting about the new DLC. First off, my credentials for having an opinion here. I have played 4 runs of Runenberg at this point. 2 on the first day, 1 on the second day, and 1 on the third day. The first run was an APOC 3 run that was very dicey. We just barely skated by, and there was a lot of challenge, but we were learning the map. Then we did an APOC 5 run. The increased movement from enemies, I think, made it still remain a little dicey, even though we were a little better at the map. Then we did an APOC 2 run that was all about the weapons. I wanted to get to know the gauntlet, get to know the cannon, get to know the war shield. And so that run was a little bit easier, and we started to find a bit of a stride. And then yesterday we did a no ballista APOC 2 run on Runenberg, and that was challenging, but I think the things that we learned through the first 3 rounds carried us, and that was by far our handiest victory. So in this video, we're going to talk about all the different features of the DLCs and what I personally think about them. That's going to cover the dwarves, the new choose your weapons for your run feature, stone medals and old medals, the beers, which caught me completely by surprise. I was very excited to see those, the new weapons, the map, and then the Runenberg boss fight specifically. I will put the Runenberg boss fight information at the very, very, very end of the video, even after I've done my conclusions around the DLC, so that people who want to avoid spoilers for the boss fight can do so. I will be sharing a lot of specific information about how the boss fight works that, for people who want to go in blind like I did, that might be a bummer. The only other thing to say before we get going is that the game is currently on sale through May 1st. You can pick up the game and the DLC for under $20, which feels like a pretty good deal. The spoiler on my conclusion is I think the DLC is great. I think they did an amazing job with it. There's lots of fun, cool stuff, and I am excited to see more DLCs come. And so I would love to see more people pick up the DLC to make it a commercial success so that the developers get the message and decide to keep developing for it. I am not sponsored in any way by Ishtar or any of the other people involved in the creation of the game. I just want to put that out there. I am strictly saying this as an avid player of the game and appreciator of the game. That being said, though, I'm open to sponsorships, just saying. So the first thing we're going to talk about is the dwarves / races. And this is the first exciting thing of my speculation that I hoped for, but was not sure was coming, which is that not only do we have dwarves, but the previous thing that we knew to be heroes, aka humans, has also been codified into kind of a first-class enemy. Or not enemy, friend. So essentially races are now a thing, and we can potentially see more races come in the future. The dwarves specifically come with less mobility, more defensive stats in the form of block and daily health regen. The early lack of mobility on dwarves is really felt, and it's felt kind of throughout the game. Towards the end game, you can offset it quite a bit, but I've had some dwarves with staggeringly low movement, which I think is fun, and it really pushes you in the direction of using Toss Me, which is one of my favorite features of the entire DLC. Tossing dwarves is extremely fun, and the upgraded version of Toss Me is like Leapfrog on steroids. But there's some really interesting things about dwarves, like the fact that they literally can't jump over a wall. So you have to think about and plan your turns a little differently when you're playing with dwarves. And my only kind of criticism in the dwarf space is that it can sometimes be hard to know which ones are the dwarves versus which ones are not the dwarves. And I know that that sounds a little weird, but their stature is, they are shorter, obviously, because they're dwarves. But unless you're looking at 2 heroes side by side and one of them is human, one of them is dwarves, it can sometimes be a little difficult to visually distinguish between them. Their haircuts help a bit, so hiding helmets can be a good thing. The other thing that this new dwarf versus human split has brought about is that things like inertia are harder to find. I have had a tremendously difficult time finding momentum heroes. My standard momentum build is relentless, inertia, and boom. That's the holy trinity. And if I can't find inertia, I'm not building these heroes. Now, that being said, inertia can be found on medals, but We'll talk more about metals in a second, but at the moment it is difficult to build, say, momentum heroes because your pool of potential heroes who can be momentum heroes is lessened because anytime you draft a dwarf, you're not going to see inertia. So very interesting. Dwarves are fun. I look forward to more races in the future. Fingers crossed. Next up, the pick your own weapons thing. This is such a amazing feature because it was low hanging fruit. Like I'm thrilled to see the developer being like, this wouldn't be that hard. Let's just put this in. We already have the scaffolding for it, and it gives players more customization, which increases the replayability of the game. The fact that they created such a beautiful interface for selecting these things, I mean, huge thumbs up, but you know, just the fact that we now have this new capability without having to mod the game files to say, I want to do a pistols only run is super duper cool. Right now, if you're playing on boundless mode, you can limit yourself down to a single weapon in a single category. But if you're playing not unbounded mode, you have to have at least 4 weapons from each category. One thing I think would be really interesting for them to add in the future is some type of scaling based off of APOC, so that as your apocalypse level goes higher, the amount that you can call your weapons down also reduces. So maybe at normal, you can go down to 4 weapons, but at APOC 5, you have to pick 6 weapons from each category. I think that could be good for balancing because at the end of the day, this is a very powerful feature for players. Being able to remove weapons that you think are crummy is a boon, to be sure. Makes it easier to win. The other thing that I think this may just be a me problem, we'll have to wait and see, but it does feel a little bit like a feature that is kind of a set it and forget it type of thing. Right now, after you set it, you don't have to think about it, and I found myself starting runs without ever looking at the screen and then going in and being like, oh yeah, there's not going to be any crossbows in this run. So making it part of the launch process, kind of like apocalypse level selection or omen selection, I think would be beneficial. It might help out the overall flow of starting a game, because otherwise I think people may forget it and may be like, oh, I was doing a weird challenge run and now I have a weird run on my hands. But if you're early in a game, abandoning it isn't such a big deal. Next up, we got metals and stone metals. So first of all, everyone got old metals. This is... I will shout this from the rooftop until I'm blue in the face. There is nothing better for a developer to do than to, when they release something that is paid content, give everyone else something free. It's amazing. It just feels so good. I'm so excited that everyone will have access to old metals. Old metals are basically trinkets that come with a tier 4 or a tier 5 perk. There are certainly some lower tier perks that I wish were included in this list. I would love to have seen bodybuilder on an old metal as an example. But even in this form, they have the potential to kind of add some transformative things. Like imagine you draft a hero that doesn't have boom, and then late in the game, you're like, this hero would be amazing with boom, and you find the right metal to be able to give it to them. That could change a mediocre hero into an absolute beast. The problem is that by my count, there are at least 20 to maybe even 30 perks that you are potentially drawing from. And so the RNG around finding just the metal you're looking for is really low. I had a run where I was like, all I want in the world is 2 boom metals. Didn't even see one, and haven't seen half of them in even the 4 runs that I've done so far. They do also come in multiple rarities, with higher rarities giving us various additional stats and those sorts of things. And also sometimes they come with negative stats, like you might have minus damage on them. All that might be mostly the stone metals that come with a default negative damage. Stone metals are just like old metals, except they come with unique perks that were designed. You have an example of one on the screen here in the Metal of Earthquake Strikes, which every 6th enemy that you hit, it applies 100% stun to all adjacent enemies. This is super duper cool. On a multi-hit hero, I suspect that this may be like insanely strong. I didn't really get to see it in my last run just because my heroes were so insanely powerful already that Earthquake Strike wasn't really stunning anyone because there was like no one left on the battlefield. But I think that there's huge potential for stone metals to be very powerful and transforming. A general observation about metals as a broad thing is the trinket slot is becoming very crowded. There are a lot of things you want to find for trinket slots, and trinket slots are not that abundant. So now you're making some really difficult choices between, do I want Earthquake Strike, or do I want the multi-hit ring, or do I want the vicious boots? Like, it's a little tricky. These, I think, also suffer from something that's true of old metals as well, which is it's hard to build around because of how inconsistent it is seeing a specific trinket. You can really think of every single perk, tier 4 and tier 5 perk, plus all of the new perks added with stone metals, as being a ballooning expansion to the trinket pool that makes it even less likely that you're going to see X, Y, or Z. So I think that's a little tricky. You're going to have to play very opportunistically with these, which means that some of the, say, old metals that I know are going to be very strong is I got an old metal of exploit weakness. It's just amazing. You're picking it up and you're gaining potentially a bunch of opportunism and a bunch of isolation, more than you would get off of your average trinket. And I think that what that is going to contribute to is the ability for the occasional metal pickup to make a hero pop off in a way that they otherwise couldn't, which I think is very, very exciting. Then we have beers. Like I said, beers totally caught me off guard. I was not expecting them. There are essentially 3 new potions. There is the Stout, Amber, and Pilsner. The Stout gives you accuracy at the cost of damage. The Amber gives you mana at the cost of health. And the Pilsner gives you crit at the cost of crit power. All of those are the numbers for the level 1 beers, and they all last for 2 turns. The level 5 Pilsner, I think, is 31% crit, which is mind-boggling. I think Pilsner is by far and away the strongest of the beers by a mile, but I do think that some of the other stouts in certain contexts could be quite strong too, or in other beers. For instance, the Stout, because you can pick up a lot of accuracy, and then that could combo with exploit weakness to great addition. They seem like a super fun thematic addition. I kind of like it. I'd love to see consumables kind of move into that first tier thing. We also got some new perks that interface with these types of things. Like you have Jolly Drinker, which every time you drink a potion, you get 2 movement back, etc. I also didn't mention it earlier, but the dwarfs obviously came with a bunch of their own perks, which seems super cool. We'll at some point investigate those, do a tier list of all the perks in the new form, but that is for a future video. Beers seem super fun. I just like them. Now on to the weapons. There are 3 weapons. I'm going to go from my perspective, from in the best place to in the worst place. So we're going to start with the cannon, which feels like it's in kind of the perfect place. I think overheat is a really fun mechanic. You're going to start doing health damage to yourself as you start to use the cannon more and more. But it also brings a lot of damage to the table. So it's doing a lot of damage and also potentially inflicting a lot of damage on yourself, which especially early game can put you in some very interesting strategic places. I think Cannonball as the first skill hits in a plus shape for 2 AP, doesn't cost any mana, packs a big punch. I think it is in contention for the best 2 AP attack in the game. It's just really strong as a primary attack, does a lot of good work. Then you have Rocket Jump for 1 AP and 2 move. It moves you around, but where you land, you do damage, which feels really good. I like Rocket Jump a lot. It adds a lot of mobility to certain builds, like multi-hit builds that otherwise were struggling a bit for mobility. Mortar is just insane. I can't imagine building 4 Mortar. I've thought a little bit about it, but the 7 to 21 range, it is something that is a nice piece of utility, especially if you're running like a high crit, high damage hero. Just being able to, with vision, from 7 to 21 yards, drop something on an unsuspecting enemy and potentially stun them is fantastic. And then Armageddon, you immediately overheat when you use it, but with some multi-hit and some crit and some decent damage, like I've been referring to it as like carpet bombing. You just kind of like click in a line down, you get a little bit of overlap, and you just evaporate an entire enemy column. It feels like it's in a great place. It feels like it is in contention to be a pair to, like right now I run wand hand crossbow a lot. I think a lot of people do. I could see the cannon subbing in for either of those and not radically reducing the power of that hero. The hero would change, it would be good at different things, but I think it's in a really good place. It is a weapon that I think you use sparingly. Unlike the hand crossbow, where I'm basically using every attack on it every turn, give or take, except maybe Blaze. This is one where you're probably using it once to twice a round and then relying on your other action or your other weapon to do most of the other work, just because you're starting to push into that overheat space. And then it pairs super well with wands and hand crossbows. I like the cannon a lot. I think it's in a good place. It's really cool, has a fun design. I like dwarves with cannons. What can I say? Then we have the war shield, which I think it's solid. I don't think it's standout in its current form. And I think it's missing just a little bit of identity to take it to that next fun level. To go through its abilities really quickly, Breach is that U shape around you. The thing that makes it hard to target is friendly fire and your own structures and those types of things. War Shield does really well out in the open, out in the field where you don't have walls or houses or those types of things. And it gets really weak in close quarter combat. No surprises there. Shield Up is your 1 AP, biggish hit, and adds block to you. I really like it. I find myself using it regularly. It gives me that extra bit of block that helps my hero kind of wade in and get the perfect guard procs that they need. That's the perk that makes you more powerful and more hits that you take. Moving Wall is your mobility attack. It's a little expensive. 2 AP, 2 mana, and 1 move feels a little pricey. A 2 AP movement skill is sometimes really hard to work around. And this one, it comes with a minus damage debuff, but it sometimes feels like the primary thing that I want to use it for is moving around. And at 2 AP, it's hard to utilize to that end. And then we have Walls of Pain, which is basically Scorching Wave out both ends of your hero for 2 AP, 4 mana. And it feels a little hard to target, which is fine. Skills are allowed to be hard to target sometimes, but it doesn't have anything. It's just straight damage. And so that leads me to my conclusion, which is the thing that I think I would like to see out of War Shield is some type of scaling based off of a defensive stat that you have acquired. My preference would be block. The idea being you use Shield Up early in the turn and it makes something else that you're doing stronger. The thing that I would buff personally is Walls of Pain. I think that if that scaled a little bit off of your block, it would become this really like, oh, you get in there, you're super strong, you drop this big bomb on both sides type of thing. And then you would feel like you're charging it up over the course of your turn with the use of Shield Up, which I think could be super fun. Overall, though, I think the War Shield gets like a B+ in my book. I think it's fun. I'm going to be using it on Blood Mages. It's got the best visuals of any of them. These big war shields just look awesome. So overall good. Only time will tell if they make some minor tweaks to it. Now on to the Gauntlet. And I just say here, this one needs a lot of help. I've included a screenshot of some discussions that happened in the Ishtar Discord regarding the Gauntlet. And basically, the short version of the story is that they made some last minute changes to the Gauntlet because they quote said that the reason for changing the Gauntlet is that we feel that in the end, it wasn't the right weapon to get a base propagation skill. So the lore of this is that much like the hand crossbow is the weapon that has base multi-hit, they were thinking about the Gauntlet being the weapon that had base propagation, aka its first ability that you get to use 3 to 4 times was going to have propagation. In the beta, when everyone was playing it, that's the way that it operated. And then after the beta, I believe they made the change to transpose, snap, and shockwave so that snap became the primary ability and shockwave the propagate became a secondary ability. But let's talk about it in its current form. In its current form, snap is this T-shaped attack for 1 AP. It has opportunism only on the bottom of the T, that primary one that you're hitting, and then it does less damage to the back ranks. If this is an opportunism weapon, it is a bad opportunism weapon because that secondary set of hits behind the primary hit really is, it's a contagion killer, right? You get a crit on one of those ones, and then rather than your contagion spreading, your contagion disappears because all of a sudden you killed the enemy that was behind it that it was supposed to transfer to. It makes snap pretty awkward to use, and the secondary damage on it is quite weak. So I find myself doing a lot of snapping at enemies and not getting a lot of value out of it. That being said, the sound effect for snap is epic, and I think it's really funny. Then we have Shockwave, which is 1 AP, 2 mana, and it feels like the ability that you want to be using. It comes with a minus armor debuff that I'm not super excited about as a general rule of thumb, but primarily I see it as you want to be doing damage with it, right? You want to be going up and shockwaving things. And what happens when I use the gauntlet early game is I use up my snaps, and then I really want to do some shockwaves because I have a lot of AP left over on my hero. And if I do 2 shockwaves a turn, I'm using 4 mana and I'm out of mana. And that feels awful, right? I run out of mana very quickly, and then the gauntlet becomes really bad because snap just isn't a good skill. The T-shaped attack is just awkward and weird, and I've never really gotten a hero to the point where they're taking full advantage of it. We're gonna try that this coming week. I'm gonna go back and we're gonna keep snapping enemies until I've reached 1,000 AP with it. But right now it feels, I would say, worse than the two-handed sword. And I'm not a big fan of the two-handed sword, but at least with the two-handed sword, charge and sword blast are strong, consistent, reliable attacks. So in the end, the gauntlet, I feel like, is lacking identity. I don't know if it's an opportunism weapon. I don't know if it's a propagate weapon. I don't know if it's a big AoE weapon. I didn't even talk about geocannon, but it feels like Death Ray's the cousin in a weird sort of way. I don't love Death Ray either. But it's fine. But then they put 3x inaccurate on it, which makes it hard to use at times. We haven't even talked about the fact that the gauntlet has a default range of 1, which is like really hard to get around. And granted, you're supposed to use Geo Reservoir in order to get more range out of it, but nothing quite tracks. So I will go on record here and say the feedback that I provided in the Ishtar Discord, since I was not part of the closed beta. So the first time I saw it was in the form that we are all seeing it in now. The way that I would like to see the gauntlet change is, first of all, I think it's a great weapon to have base propagate on. I actually think it's the perfect weapon. And the reason is because I think that the way the weapon should work is the way that I imagined it working when I first started reading it, which is that the base skills, Snap, Shockwave, and Geocannon, all remain melee range, aka range 1. They can only hit things that are directly adjacent to the hero. But right now, those are skill modifiable, and I would say remove that. So they are not skill modifiable. You have to be standing directly next to the enemy to hit it. You make Shockwave the primary, 1 AP, make it propagate 2 or maybe propagate 3, but probably propagate maybe even 1 to 2 would be enough. So it's going to hit 2 to 3 targets by default. As you get propagation bounces, that will go up. Then make Geo Reservoir remove the limitation on skill range. So now your skill range affects your attacks and it also grants some skill range. So now if you have Shockwave and you get it to the point where it hits 6 enemies, you run up to those enemies, you Shockwave them, you get 6 hits, then all of a sudden your second attack has a long range. You do it again and you kind of rinse and repeat and do that. But the gauntlet never becomes a weapon that you're poking things from a long way away from. Instead, it's something that maybe you pair with the War Shield and you have your hero in the thick of things, and now they have this big propagate and they need to be in the crowd so that they can send those propagates out. I think it could be really cool. I think there is real potential here, and I think those minor tweaks could potentially make all the difference. I like the gauntlet. I think thematically it's really cool. I want it to be awesome. And if this doesn't come to fruition the way that I described it, which it may not, the developers, at the end of the day, need to do what makes sense for their game, and I totally support them making the decisions that they want to make. I'll mod it to look the way that I just described it, and we can all try it out and see if it's fun or not. Only time will tell. But for now, that's my thoughts on the gauntlet. Right now, it is one that once I get my 1,000 AP used in it, I will likely ban it in the weapon selection and never look at it again. It stinks because the graphics for it are beautifully done. They look really cool. The gauntlet with the purple fingers, ooh, very neat. Anyways, still an interesting weapon. I hope we see a little more value out of it in the future. So now I'm going to do some conclusions before I talk about the map. If you are interested in this game, it is on sale through May 1st right now. Go check it out if you are so inclined at $20. I've put 1,000 hours into the last spell and spent $32, and it feels like a great deal. So you could pick it up now for 20 and you might find yourself spending a couple hundred hours in it too, and it'll be well worth the money. The amount of content that they're adding for $7.99, which is the not on sale price, feels great. The concepts that they've introduced are something that they can grow on in the future, which is really exciting. More races, etc., all feel really good. The map is beautiful. No spoilers about it, but it's a good looking map. I appreciate the hard work that went into making it look the way that it looks. And I also think that it fits in a good place in the advancement curve of the game. So thumbs up for that. Dwarves are fun to toss. Tossing dwarves is the best part of the expansion by far. And it just brings a smile to my face every time I toss a dwarf. And then there's plenty of new things to fuel future mod development. The fact that now I can apply perks to equipment, that's going to open up a whole new realm of design for me and the Discord community to make cool mods. So if you're on the fence, go for it. I think this is not a game that you'll be disappointed in. The developers put their heart and soul into it. Even if I don't agree with every decision that they make, they're making a good game and I'm enjoying it. So with that said, there's going to be 2 tiers of spoilers here. What I'm going to talk about next is the map in broad strokes, which you may be fine hearing about. And then I will talk about the boss in particular in detail. So if you don't want to see that, avert your eyes or stop watching. If you've made it this far though, and you like what I'm doing here, toss me a sub, toss me a like on the video. It helps out a great deal. I have a whole host of other videos if you're just getting into the last spell and you're looking for help on how to build your heroes, how to harness the power of corpse piles, or anything else in between. I have a ton of videos on the channel that you can find in the last spell playlist linked in the video description. But now let's talk about the map. So this map is short. It is 8 nights long, and well, the 8th night feels like 4 nights because it's extremely long, that particular night. The whole thing feels really short and a bit rushed. I have generally found myself getting to the end of it with underleveled and undergeared heroes, and that's been a little tricky to deal with. I think that well, we're not talking strategy here. You really need to prioritize XP on your heroes in Runenberg, or you're not going to find your heroes even hitting their last tier of perks by the time you're finishing things up. This may be a total coincidence, but I have had a really high density of hunters on this map, the bounty hunters. And that means that I've lost a few heroes to just like being randomly targeted by like 15 aimed shots. It's a little unpleasant, but I'm not going to say that that's a map design flaw. The town layout is interesting. I think from some help from Illustrious in the community, thank you, Illustrious, we have found a better, or I guess he found a better way to map out the town layout than what I was doing before. And it feels a little more manageable than it previously did. But there's some really interesting facets to Runenberg that I think make it a fun and unique feeling map. The random side, which is the northeast side, I'm relatively sure of that at this point, doesn't feel super random. I think that it would feel more interesting if there were a few more line of sight blocking elements in the random generation so that it actually felt a bit more impactful. Right now, it's kind of like an empty space, sometimes with different chasms, which is still interesting. I'm glad they're moving in that direction when we're talking about things that they can grow on. It's really cool to think that maps could become more random over time. There's been a lot of debate, but my personal opinion is that this map feels harder than Glenwald and easier than Elderlicht, and I think that's where they're targeting. So I think they hit the difficulty just about right. The runestones don't feel particularly impactful to me. Those are the things that you can like trigger and they explode and they poison or they freeze, those types of things. They don't feel super impactful to me because I do a lot of fighting in the Haven to maximize corpse piles, and the runestones are never in the Haven. The harpies on this map, aka the ailerons, I believe they are called, hit really freaking hard and also debuff you. They're a fun addition. We didn't get a new enemy per se, but harpies are now like an official, more serious part of the map, which I think is a fun wrinkle. Overall, I give the map 2 too enthusiastic thumbs up. There's some interesting quirks and features to the boss fight that we'll talk about next. And I'll put up a spoiler warning here. Do not proceed if you want to learn about the boss fight on your own like I did. I think it's worth doing it that way. So I wouldn't watch this part of the video if I were you, but some people are curious. So what is the structure of the final night? It is a minimum of 12 turns, and the turns are not short. It exists for me conceptually in four phases, but 3 rounds. So the phases are, there's like an intro phase where the horde is just creeping in. Then there are 3 rounds of 2 events. The first event being spawning of corrupted runestones. You kill all the corrupted runestones, and then a dwarf statue becomes vulnerable. You kill the dwarf statue, and then you rinse and repeat. Those 3 rounds start on night 6. And I wrote down like the way that I'm thinking of it right now. But basically what happens is, starting on night 6, you get corrupted runestones, you kill them, and then you get a dwarf statue. Then you take a turn off, then you get another round of corrupted runestones, you kill all of those, then you get two dwarf statues pop up. Then there's no pause, you get another round of corrupted runestones, and then on the 12th night, you get the final dwarven statue. All of these can be delayed if you don't kill all of the corrupted runestones during the C phases of the night. If you miss one, the night will drag on kind of indefinitely. It is an interesting boss fight. I don't mind it. Some people are a little more annoyed with it than others. It definitely takes about like 80 minutes, I think is how long it takes me, like 60 to 80 minutes to do just this one night. So it's a bit of a marathon for those that are a bit allergic to that. And I think the design challenge that the developers were trying to deal with is that because of how far they push back the mist for this night, it takes a long time for the horde to start applying pressure. I think that the solution that I would make is I would shorten the 6 nights, the 6 turns at the beginning down so that you get to the dwarf statue killing stuff more on like turn 3-ish, something like that. But to do that, you need to push in the mist or there's going to be no pressure applied to your heroes. So I think that's the one way that I might tweak it. And by doing that, I think you could get into that 6-turn like rotation thing faster because the enemies could get to your walls quicker. The other thing to note in terms of mechanics is that killing a corrupted runestone with an enemy inside of its blast radius turns that enemy into a elite boomer, which is a fun little surprise the first time that happens. And it means that not only do you have to get there and destroy the corrupted runestone, but ideally you need to clear everything out. Although I have found that often it is easier to not clear things out and just kill the boomer or slow death the boomer so that it never moves. The final night is a little controversial. I like it, broadly speaking. I think there's some minor tweaks they could make to tighten it up, shorten it up a tiny little bit, make it a little more intense. But overall, I think that in the pantheon of bosses, it has a good flavor to it. The other thing that I will say, and this is like a quality of life thing, it is hard to find the corrupted runestones. I have posted a suggestion in the Ishtar Discord about this. I think what needs to happen is left alt needs to show you how far the horde is coming in and show you the location of all of the prominent map features at that given moment, be them soul vessels or druids or Nessie eggs or exploding orbs. All of these things should be highlighted so you don't miss them, so that players are less likely to make mistakes. But I already gave you my conclusions. If you're on the fence and thinking about buying the game, go buy it. It's a good game. I enjoy it. I've put a lot of time into it, and I find there's a huge amount of replayability. But other than that, that's it for me. Thank you for watching. I hope you have a wonderful day, and I will see you in the next one. Bye.